Well, I've just been here, I just got off the plane this afternoon, and I've just had a steak and two scotches, and that's good enough so far, and hotels by the beach, so it's all looking good.
Oh, great then. Well, first things first, when did you discover you wanted a career as a comics artist?
Well, you want to keep this long or short? It's up to you. I first discovered that I wanted to be a comic artist. Well, let me tell you, it comes down to the inspiration, my first inspiration. When I was about 12 years old, I saw still one of the finest pieces of comic art I've ever seen, and it's still fantastic. And it was a big full-color spread in a comic called Boy's World, and the story was called Wrath of the Gods, and it was a story that was about Greek mythology, so it was made up, so it had the Gorgon, it had the Atlas, it had Cerberus, it had all those fantastic things, and it was drawn by an artist called Ronald Embleton, and it was the most, it was the strip, the first strip I saw that actually really made you believe that it existed. Ronald Embleton was a fantastic draftsman, and it was the most convincing thing I'd seen as a comic strip, and like a movie. And I mean, my thought seeing that, I was so impressed by it that I thought, if you can do that with comics, then that's what I want to do. Because, you know, the ability to create a whole world and make it convincing with art is something that I just thought was great. So that was my inspiration, really. So that's what I guess decided me to do it. And then at school, I used to do comic strips on and off, as well as other art. I wasn't obsessed with the idea. It's just it was something I wanted to do. And then, when I got a job, I trained in advertising art, and during the lunch hours at that studio, I was doing comics, and I was doing them at home, as you know, just to almost entertain myself. But I really wanted to learn and study the art form. And I have to say something. I'm not ashamed to say this, but I am a natural storyteller. So I never had any trouble learning how to tell a story with comics. I didn't have to learn that too much. But actually becoming a good artist, that was something I had to work at. Because at a certain point, before I started a career in it, after I left this advertising studio, at a certain point, I realized that I just needed to improve, that I wasn't good enough. So I had 2 years of part-time jobs, and each of those part-time jobs was 3 days a week, and the rest of the time I would study to become better. And then I would send samples off to publishers and keep hoping that I wouldn't get rejected. And eventually I got a job, which did turn out very well. And then the next job I got was the big turning point, and that's where my career began. Really. So that's reasonably short, isn't it? It's,
How old were you then when you say your career began started? How old were you?
27 when I began. So quite late. A lot of guys start earlier, but 27 was when my career began. The same year that Star Wars began.
All right, thank you. Who would you say were your comic heroes as a child?
As a child, I don't think I really had any comic heroes as a child.
As a teenager, maybe?
Well, I mean, yeah, it depends. Comics. I loved Mad Magazine when I was a kid. I loved Mad Magazine, and I came across Wally Wood in Mad Magazine, but I didn't actually know who he was. I just recognised that he was great, and also the great cartoonists of Mad Magazine, like Walt Drucker, who did all those fantastic film satires. And George Woodbridge, Jack Davis was working in Mad Magazine. So when I was reading that when I was a kid, and I guess I was more interested in the cartoons then. As a teenager, though, it was, as I say, that amazing inspiration from Ronald Appleton. And then there's a fantastic British artist called John Burns. That's John M. Burns, not the guy that did is the guy who did X-Men. That's not him. It's John M. Burns. He's a superb artist. He was really inspirational for me. He did a newspaper strip called Seekers. And I was reading that when I was at the studio, the advertising studio. And then, but more importantly, after Ron Appleton, it was Steve Ditko. But not when he was doing Spider-Man, he was doing these great short stories in something called Amazing Adult Fantasy. It was incredible things. And then, inevitably, it was Jack Kirby, Fantastic Four, which was just, Fantastic Four was just amazing stuff. Kirby at his best. And then there was a lot of American artists like Alex Toth, Gray Morrow. I saw a lot of, and guys like Al Williamson. There's a whole slew of artists who became important. So they were all heroes and all terrific guys. And the one thing to say about those guys, though, is that a lot of those guys were doing great stuff that wasn't really recognised well. There's a great artist called Reed Crandall who was doing fantastic work for things like Tales from the Crypt and all this. And he ended up as a night watchman because nobody really cared. These days, it's much different. These days, artists can get royalties and own things. I mean, when I started, it was very unusual for anybody to own their work. It was all work for hire. The publisher gave you a page rate, and that was it. And you didn't own anything. You didn't get royalties. So that was the late 70s and 80s. Now that's all changed now. So luckily, it changed gradually because people recognised, or publishers recognised, that giving creators more money, giving them their due is a good idea. But that's a whole other story. But in the 50s and stuff, guys were just they weren't treated well at all. They were just kicked around. And well, the other story you might know is of Siegel and Schuster not getting anything for this from Superman until Neil Adams, another great artist, actually agitated and got them some money. But thankfully that's all changed.
Do you know what gave you the inspiration for V, the character in V for Vendetta, to look like a guy in a Guy Fawkes mask?
Well, it was the idea. It was basically the idea of actually bringing Guy Fawkes back to life. Alan wrote an outline for V for Vendetta from the basic idea that we both had: an urban guerrilla fighting a fascist dictatorship in the future England. But the basic character we had was just basically an urban guerrilla, a guy who was very had needed to fight the regime and wanted to bring it down, not only because it was a good idea, but because he had personal reasons for it. But that was it. But we wanted a character that had more colour and deeper motivations. And we didn't know what he was going to look like, whether he was going to wear a costume, what kind of costume, would it be an undercover? One of the ideas would be an undercover policeman, a policeman who is acting subversive within the structure. Anyway, none of those things really worked, and we couldn't come up with anything. And then I had this crazy idea, so it's I credit it to me, so it's my idea. I had the idea. It was just a crazy idea. I thought, we had this character called Guy Fawkes, who you know is, well, I don't know how much you know of English, you know, you're learning English and English and stuff, but how much you know about it. But Guy Fawkes was a failed revolutionary who tried to rob the Houses of Parliament in 1605 with a bunch of conspirators called the Gunpowder Plotters. He failed, all the conspirators were killed and captured, so as Guy Fawkes was. But he tried to blow up the House of Parliament. But he did believe he believed in the cause that he had, and he just failed because, well, unlucky. Well, there's a big story about that whole thing that they knew that these conspirators were plotting, and they wanted it to go ahead because having uncovered the plot, they wanted people to know there was a plot. So anyway, but that's beside the point. Guy Fawkes failed, but for years, traditionally, Guy Fawkes was a character who we celebrated the execution of every November the 5th. Every house would build a dummy, an effigy of Guy Fawkes, and they would stick it on a bonfire and burn it up and celebrate that with fireworks. So it was celebrating the terrible act of Guy Fawkes and the fact that we executed him, and wasn't that all a great thing? That's traditionally what we did. But you've got to remember that me and Alan and a lot of creators at that time were actually against the establishment. Celebrating the execution of Guy Fawkes as a revolutionary who was trying to defeat a corrupt regime was something we thought was great. You know, the thing is, we thought that Guy Fawkes was a great anti-establishment character. So that's what led to the thought that, well, yeah, look, this guy was actually a good guy, you know, and wouldn't it be a good idea to bring him back? So to have our urban guerrilla adopt the guise of Guy Fawkes, like a kind of resurrection, a reincarnation of the character. And not only that, but this time he succeeds in blowing up the House of Parliament, which is the great act of sabotage and a blow against the corrupt government. So I ran that past Alan, and actually I thought, well, it was just a crazy idea. Alan said, "That's good, that's great, that's what we'll do." And the rest is what is up to Alan, because what he did with it was great. And so that's it. It just came out of a crazy idea of bringing Guy Fawkes back to life. So that's what we did.
All right, thank you. Going a little bit into the creative process right now, you have a unique partnership with Alan, and I don't know whether these fans would agree, but I think that the majority of them define you as the artist, while Alan is the storyteller. Is it as neat as that, or do you also make contributions in the stories and he makes suggestions as to how the outlook should look like?
Well, that's very complicated. In the mind, it's true. Alan is a storyteller. I am basically the guy that makes it live, basically. But the way that we worked, I wouldn't do anything I didn't like. Once the thing started, Alan, as you know, if you've read the graphic novel, it's a series of books. It's made up of a series of books. Alan would write a synopsis for each one of those books. That would be the first thing he'd do, and then I'd look at it and we'd talk about it. And if there was something I didn't think would work, I suggested it. For instance, I won't go too many of these instances, but the character of Evie and Gordon, Alan wanted to make Gordon like a big hulking guy, you know, like a kind of like a bruiser, you know. And I said that's not a good idea, because then you've got Beauty and the Beast. And we've already got Beauty and the Beast with V and Evie. So you're just doing the same thing. And I thought it would be better if he was just an ordinary guy, a normal guy. And so that was, so we didn't do that. So I made him a normal guy, and that's it. So, but that's basically the way it would work. And then past that, every time he would send a script, because initially when it was done for a British magazine, it was done monthly, and we would do 6 to 8 pages. Actually, just one of the reasons why it's so good, Lee, I'll tell you why. We did 6 to 8 pages every month, and that was all we did. It wasn't like an American comic book where you had to do a lot. When it was done for DC, when the last episodes were done for DC, it was all done in 22-page chunks, but that's another story. But initially, when it began, those early days, we had time to think. 6 to 8 pages a month, that gives you time to think and to experiment. So that's one of the reasons why V is so good. It was, and also it was made up as we went along to a large degree. When we started it, there was no great plan. It wasn't all worked out. It all grew organically, which is another reason why it's so good. But when Alan wrote the scripts of those things, I would read the script, and then the only contribution I would mainly add after that would be, I would sometimes suggest that we split frames, so that there were more frames for pacing and different action. But that's a bit sort of technical. You don't want me to go into that too much. But I will just tell you one other thing that was relevant to the input that I had, and I'll tell you what it is. In chapter 11, I think it is, I think it's chapter 11, there's a whole section in the Shadow Gallery where there's a lot of exposition, a lot of talking, explanation. Finch is explaining things to the leader. And when Alan wrote that, he said to me, Dave, I've got a lot of exposition. We'll just put him in the Shadow Gallery. You can have him anywhere you like. But it's just a lot of talk that I've got to use here, a lot of script. Thank you. So that was, I had carte blanche. Now, I thought to myself at the time that it'd be, because V's got everything in the Shadow Gallery. He's got all kinds of stuff. He's got galleries, he's got everything. I thought, wouldn't it be a good idea if we had a private cinema, a kind of little private cinema, where he can run slideshow, maybe a past love, maybe his family members. We don't know who these people are. Because one of the things that struck me about V at that time was that he was inhuman. He was powerful, we saw what he did, but there was nothing, we never saw anything about him at that stage. And Valerie Page, the experience of Valerie Page is the core, almost the core of the book. But that came out of an accident, just that crazy thing, where you think, oh, you have an idea, you put it down, it looks good. And so it's, in a sense, it's like the Guy Fawkes thing. You have a crazy idea, Alan sort of looks at it and says, yeah, let's do that. And then, the genius comes to work and does what he did. So, but it's a lot of creativity is accident, let me tell you. It really is. It's like painting a picture. If you paint a picture, you don't know exactly where the yellow and the green and everything is going to be. But you figure it out as you go along. And sometimes you'll add a little bit of yellow here and you think, oh man, that looks great, or that works. So, see?
My next question actually has a little bit to do with that. Is there anything you still find difficult to do? Have there been maybe some characters or stories or ideas that you have struggled to depict?
it depends on what you're doing. I think if you, the hardest work I ever had to do, really, was on the war stories that I did with Garth Ennis. I did a couple of war stories. One was set on board a destroyer, and another one in a Lancaster bomber. And because they were very serious stories and about real war, they had to be completely accurate. And Garth gave me this massive model book that had shots of the inside and outside of Lancaster bomber. I had to buy one of those Airfix Lancaster bombers that they stuck together, but I only stuck them together with sellotape, so it did not too much hard work. But I had to do that, and I went to the Imperial War Museum and into the photo files there. Went to the RAF Museum, where you can actually go inside the cockpit of one of those, and took lots of photographs, and you had to get it exactly right. So, and with the destroyer the same. I mean, I did actually go on board a destroyer, the one that you still go on, because that's very important. But that is hard work. I mean, I'm very proud of those stories and what they ended up looking like, but. Using a lot of reference material does take away a lot of the creative enjoyment. So I can't say I enjoyed it as much as I would anything else, but that's the only thing. But that's your job. You have to. You tell a story. You have to tell it in a convincing way. And I guess it goes back exactly to what I was saying about Ron Lepperton. Convincing people that story exists. Is real, that's your job, really. So,
thank you. I think we should pass now to the audience. Yeah. Have we got another microphone?
Take this one.
Yeah. Is
Bring
this
it back.
long enough? I don't think so.
I think we have a remote one. The guy's bringing. Microphone. I think we might have to. He's gonna. Tem que desplugar lá, né, Glenn? This is your
Hello. Hi. Oh, sorry. I actually have plenty of questions that I've been thinking during the whole day, but mostly, you said you were a storyteller. What inspired you? I write. I can speak loud. Yeah. When I write, when I see something around, reality in general inspires me to do something. So my main question is, what inspires you? I was thinking about that when I was actually reading Alan's, when he says in the beginning of the book about his experience, and we was watching England and watching what was happening in England that time, and it was one of the inspirations of the book. So, as a Brazilian, as a person who likes politics, and as a storyteller, as I would like to describe myself as, that's what's main interesting. So I don't know if I'm making a lot of sense. Yeah. But mostly, what inspires you when you are thinking about a story? What did you see? And also, as a writer, again, I always carry a notebook with me to see something and write about it. So I'm also thinking about when you see something, do you write? What do you do? What's your process when you get this quick thought? And that's the thing I want to do. So
okay, well, first of all, in the inspiration for V was the fact that we. The inspiration for V was the fact that both myself and Alan were political, as you yourself do, and we were very concerned. The reason why we had both written stories about an urban guerrilla fighting a fascist dictatorship in the future of England was that at the time there was a rise of a radical right-wing party called the National Front, who were a bunch of fascist neo-Nazis. You know, every country's got them. And now they're coming out of the woodwork.
We totally understand.
Yeah, in France, and now they're getting into power in Germany. All those monstrous little creatures, they just come out like cockroaches. They come out at certain points in history, in economic times. Anyway, so that was an inspiration. That was the inspiration. Both myself and Alan were that. Personally, I like to tell stories about things that mean something. So if I have a chance to write, or a choice of the story I'm doing, which is mainly what I do now. I mean, I'm not drawing at all now. I publish, which I can tell you about shortly. But if somebody offers me a job, I want it to be a story that says something, means something. And if I write a story myself, it's got to be about something that I'm interested in and you should tell a story about. For instance, we've all heard about this terrible thing that happened in Las Vegas over the weekend. Those guys, they're what they call berserk killers. They call them berserk killers. And I did a story about those because there was a certain incident, another incident happened in America I heard about, and I thought that I want to say something about it. So you know, saying something that's telling a story that's about something important, that says something. Because what's the point? What's the point of just doing one Spider-Man story after another? What does it mean? You know, it's okay if you don't want to, if you've got no point of view. But if you've got a point of view and you're an artist, you naturally want to use your art, writing or art to say something about it. So that's what I do. But that the last point you made about the notebook, yeah, I had a notebook when I was working at the advertising studio that I told you about. I had lots of little ideas and I'd write them out. And in fact, the story I told you about the Berserk Killer came from a title, "Looking Good, Feeling Great." That's actually the title of the story. And then I did another story, came from a title called Rescue Dog. I was interested a story about a dog that gets rescued, and that became a story in Gangland called The Big Snooze. So all the short stories, in fact, that I've done, and I haven't had a chance to write much. Wish I had, but then you can't do everything. If you pay your bills with art, then that's what you do. But anyway, all the stories have been something about something meaningful, and also corruption. I did a crime thriller called Kickback. It's all about corruption, how people can become corrupt and how they free themselves from it. So it's similar to actually V in thematically, because V is about a society that becomes corrupt, and how V attempts to free it from its corruption. So, yeah, but I know what you mean. Yeah, I do what you do.
Next, please.
Hi, first, thank you very much for coming. It's, I think, really important for everyone. Recently, I was studying about the work of Bill Watterson, the creator of Calvin and Hobbes, the cartoons, yes. And he never licensed his work for anything more than the comic books. So there aren't any products about Calvin and Hobbes. I want to know, and I think Alan Moore is really against licensing things. I think I read an interview about him being regretted of Watchmen film and V for Vendetta too. I would like to know your opinion on licensing your artwork to products, and if in some way this corrupts the art or if it helps to spread your idea.
Well, in the instance of V, the licensing or the movie adaptation did great for the book. People went out and saw the movie and then they bought the book. So they see the copy and then they get the real McCoy. And that's been good. In terms of licensing, if you have the control of your work, then if you give it out, then be in control. Or free it, or don't have any control. It's up to you. In the case of V, we didn't own the copyright. I mean, we owned the copyright up to the point that we sold it to DC, the comic. And they wouldn't buy it unless they owned it. So we didn't own it. But we had a contract for it, and we got a good deal out of it. But it was our choice whether we would go with DC and. But after that, the movie was up to them. Luckily, I was given the opportunity to sort of say some things about the initial screenplays, and my comments and criticism on the first screenplay were used as the ones that DC gave to Joel Silver, and that movie never got made. That never got made. Thankfully, if you'd seen that, it was terrible. And then the second time, actually the second screenplay was by the Wachowskis. They wrote another, which was actually closer to the original. And then right after they wrote that, they made The Matrix, and that took them away from it. But actually, that was very fortuitous about them making The Matrix, because when they came back to the project, because they still wanted to do it, they were fans of V from way back. When they came back to it, they were not only the writers, the producers. That meant they had much more control. So I think that V as a movie turned out pretty good, and I supported it when it came out. In an ideal world, it would be close to the original, but the Wachowskis had the prerogative to add their own. Some other things that I sometimes describe what they did as sort of like fan fiction. You know, people who write about Spock's early days in the Academy and stuff like that, because they loved it and they wanted to add that whole thing, you know, like the Monte Cristo thing. They probably thought, oh, that'd be good if you like Monte Cristo, you know, because it all works. So, but my attitude to the movie is it's a really great piece of cinema and very powerful and did good. For the book, and you know, I'm very fond of it now. I'm very fond of that movie, and I just think to answer your question about Alan, you've got to remember though, if Alan was complaining about Watchmen and V, okay, because he never had control over it. He didn't own them. But don't forget that Alan owned League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and he owned From Hell. So we can't be entirely against license. So, that's it. But if you want to license something, control it. But it doesn't have to be a bad thing if you give somebody a license. But just as long as you control it, and if they're not doing what you want, well, stop it. But it's...
Thank you. Here.
Yeah.
Well, you talked about having control of your art, and I think, what do you think about groups like Anonymous and another kind of people that think they're fighting for something and they use your art, the thing that you created, as a flag of their causes? What's your opinion about like groups like Anonymous, and how do you feel about your creation being used by other people to express their urges for fighting their own causes, even if they are not your causes?
Well, I think it's good. That's the short answer, and because the important thing about everybody that's using that is they are using that with good intention. They're using different methods to get what they think is good for everybody. But they're using it with good intention. Occupy, Anonymous, all those political demonstrations, they're using that mask as a means of protest. It's a symbol of resistance. and resistance to tyranny. And sometimes it'll be a perceived tyranny that they're using it for, but it's something they're using as a symbol. So I'm very happy with it, and I see it everywhere. You know, it's used as graffiti. I've seen it used as graffiti in Croatia and Spain, and I think it's great. I think I've got no complaints about it.
But how do you feel if like some right-wing group, like extreme fascist group, something like that, start using your mask for their causes?
Well, that'd be bad, and I would hate to see that. But you know, you can't control it. You know, you once your art is out in the world, that's it.
That's what.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's out there. It's out there, and you can't do anything about it. I wouldn't like it at all, of course. But, you know.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's like the swastika, you know? The swastika. The swastika.
Yeah, of course.
Whenever you think about the
The
swastika,
beginning
you
was
think
like
of that
graffiti,
Nazi party.
yeah.
But that's not the
Perfect example.
used.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Very.
yeah.
Just watch.
Tem muita vergonha na imprensa de ser quer falar em português? Eu vou tentar falar em inglês. Não olhem pra mim ali pra frente. I'm so sorry, I'm embarrassed about my English because I don't study English at all.
You can't be more embarrassed than I am about my Brazilian Portuguese.
So, I really love to draw, and I really wanted about my whole life to become a professional artist. But I have a really big problem with deadlines because I can never reach them. I am always too lazy to finish them and things like that. And I really love to write and do other stuff, and this ended up making me stop wanting to be an artist. And I wanted to know if you struggle with that too, if you pass it by something like that, and what you have to say for something like it.
Okay, well, yeah, deadlines are always a big problem, especially in the industry, because they demand a lot of work in a short time. But when I was practicing to get into the business, I realised that. And what I used to do, I used to see how long it would take me to do a page. And if I thought it was too long, next time I'd try and draw that page faster. So, because I knew that I wouldn't be able to work in the industry as a comic artist unless I could do a page in a reasonable level. So I ended up, it took me 1.5 days to do pencils, and then this is when I was learning, and then longer to do the inks. And you just have to work. You have to recognise how long it's taking you on a realistic level. You just have to study how to do that. If you're not working in the industry, though, there's no reason to reach deadlines. But even so, you know, even if you're doing a story for a self-published magazine or something, somebody's still going to say, "Hey, when can I have it? You know, when will you finish it? Can you tell me?" And you're going to have to know. You're going to have to know something about that. I mean, it's entirely up to you, though. But if you wanted to work in the industry, you would have to ask an editor or a publisher, "Okay, so how fast do I have to be?" And then you would have to train yourself to do that. But I understand it's not easy, but it's easier if you just got to study, you just got to work at it. There's no easy answer to it. I found one way of actually helping myself when I did the war stories, because there was a lot of work, a lot of reference work to do. So what I did to get work, to do the work faster, was that I would have a whole bunch of panels on the page, and there would be maybe 2 panels I'd need to do lots of reference work on. So I'd leave those, and I'd do the other 3 panels that I didn't need the reference for, then I'd go through the whole thing, and so at the end I had just all the panels that needed heavy reference. So at least I got that all. I got far along, but that's just that's just me in that circumstance. But there's no easy answer to that, really. You've got to find out how you don't want to work too fast because you're trying to do good work. But then there's the problem with being perfectionists. It's like no easy answers. I'm sorry.
So, Mr. David, I was really curious when we were talking because, okay, nowadays, like there's YouTube and internet, and it's kind of easy for someone that wants to learn to draw, have something to be referenced on. But as you said, you practice, and did you just practice on your own to become an artist, or did you, like, what was your main of studying? Because you didn't have, like, all these resources that we have nowadays. It makes it very easy to.
Yeah, I didn't work in the studio. There's no point. I mean, when I was learning, yeah, just on my own. It's like, well, you've got to. The only way you can maintain discipline is to work on your own, because you can get distracted. If you're working with other people, you can get distracted. If you're studying, I mean, I guess it's not like studying for, I don't know, science exam or something, because I suppose you can help each other in a situation like that. But when you're actually, you've got a personal goal that you're trying to reach as an achievement. Like I used to spend weeks just drawing legs. That's what you have to do. It's that hard and that simple. You recognise, hey, I'm no good at legs, so you just got to spend the weeks drawing legs. So that's what I used to do. And if you're aiming for a personal goal for something, you have to do it on your own. I don't think anybody can help you. No. And I make sure I've always worked. I've never worked in a studio, even as a professional. There are people like Dave Gibbons, and I don't know if he still does this. Dave Gibbons used to work in a studio with a guy called Mick McMahon, who's another great artist. And they used to chat and talk about football and God knows what else. But they were still working, they were still doing work. And Steve Dillon, who's sadly no longer with us, another great artist, he used to work in a studio with a guy called John Higgins. But I never could do that. It would just be distracting. The only thing I'd have some music playing or something like that. I'd never work in a studio.
Hello.
Hi.
What's your favorite hero and why? In DC Comics or Marvel Comics?
No, I don't. I mean, look, as I say, when I was a teenager, I thought, Fantastic Four was fantastic. And Spider-Man, those early Spider-Man things were incredible. It was a time I wanted to do Nick Fury. Not the crazy way that Nick Fury is now. I mean, Jack Kirby's original Nick Fury was a great character. He was like a sort of roughneck James Bond. Really great character. But that Jack Kirby was, Nick Fury was really good. And actually, it was a time I actually wanted to. I suggested it to Marvel. I did a drawing of how I would do it, and actually asked them. This was before V, or maybe just after. I can't remember now. Anyway, but it was something I wanted to do, and they were interested. But I tell you what happened. I'll tell you why I never did it, and that is Marvel. They're not exactly the kindest people in the world. And Marvel wanted. I'd sent them some other story ideas before that. It was nothing to do with Nick Fury. It was something else. And in order for them to give me a contract to do Nick Fury, they wanted me to completely disarm all the stories that I'd done for them as proposals. Now that's disgraceful. You want me to disarm everything I propose to you as a thing before I do that? No. So I didn't do it, but I would like to do it. It's a good character.
Thank you.
Well, that took me by surprise. Thank you very much.